Did everyone watch the film?
Oh shit, we were supposed to watch a film?
Uh,
Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Plump. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and human evolution.
and I'm Ross Barnett, a paleogeneticist interested in old dead DNA.
And none of us specialize in medieval France, correct?
No.
Because today we're reviewing the movie Timeline from 2003, based on the Michael Crichton book of the same name. I don't know what we're going to have to say about the actual stuff that takes place in 14th century France, but I guess we can talk about all the archaeology that happens before they get there, if nothing else. So who wants to summarize this one?
I mean, I can try. Kim's looking pleadingly. I've got notes.
I'm so bad at it.
I'm terrible too. But I mean, this film is a stinker. It really is.
I read the book and I enjoyed it.
I haven't read the book. I was super surprised after finishing the film to look up that it was actually a Michael Crichton book. Michael Crichton, who gave us Jurassic Park and Westworld, amongst many others, Andromeda Strain as well. But this was just...
It's not his best book, but it's a perfectly fine, beach read book.
Okay.
Michael Crichton hated this movie so much that this is the reason he stopped licensing his books to be made into movies. I don't think they ever made another book into a movie after this because he hated this movie so much.
And that's fair. I think he might have been doing us all a favor. Anyway, so, I mean, my notes are fairly obtuse, I think. I've got stuff like, oh, it's that guy, because this film is absolutely jam-packed full of famous faces and incredible actors who I assume must have been seduced by it being a Michael Crichton script, and Richard Donner, who did Superman and various other films directing. But there's a whole kind of prologue about a guy dressed in medieval stuff who appears on a road in what is clearly kind of Southern California, and there's all sorts of medical stuff. He dies. Things are going on that the hospital don't know about, but really none of that really matters, I think, to the main plot of the film, except just to set up a mood that these scientists are bad. They're doing experiments that they're not supposed to be doing. And then it kind of cuts fairly abruptly to Billy Connolly, Scotland's Sir Billy Connolly, as he is now, one of our most famous exports, who's playing Professor of Archaeology. Gerard Butler is there too, another famous Scottish expert. This film has a lot of good Scottish accent in it, which is great as a Scot. And it also has a lot of English bastards getting killed, which is also fantastic as a Scot. But yeah, so it opens with Billy Connolly, who's doing the ironing, which I thought was nice. I think he's on record as being a big fan of ironing, so that's great. You kind of get a whole bunch of setups with Billy Connolly running this dig, Gerard Butler being his kind of second in command. His son is Paul Walker of the Fast and the Furious, I think, though I've not seen those films. He has a love interest who's an archaeologist called Kate, and that's kind of setting up the main characters around about this dig. Billy Connolly's son, Paul Walker, doesn't give a shit about archaeology, so there's some tension there. Paul Walker is madly in love with archaeologist Kate, who loves nothing but archaeology, so there's some tension there too. And yeah, we see some nice shots of Gerard Butler doing archery, like any archaeologist would. But there's some nice touches there. He's wearing a wrist guard, which you don't often see in kind of film depictions of archery, but is a fairly essential piece of kit if you're going to do kind of proper old school archery. They're digging in France. There's a bit of a backstory about how there was it's kind of the kind of perennial fight between the English and the French, which has gone on for as long as anyone remembers. But you have a kind of village and a castle, and that they're excavating in France, which was apparently the site of a big battle between the English and the French. the English had the castle. They murdered Lady Clare, who was a French noblewoman, while the castle was under siege, and they kind of hung her body over the battlements, and this outraged the French so much that they were then able to push through and storm the castle and take it back. That's the kind of setup for everything that kind of goes on. They excavate a nice kind of sarcophagus, a stone sarcophagus, which has a woman and a man kind of lying in repose, carved onto the top of it. And the guy has one ear, which is some major foreshadowing for events later on. And yeah, there's some sort of nice lines, I guess, if you're into archaeology. But there's, I think Jared Butler says that history is just about stories. He's trying to sell archaeology to Paul Walker's character while they're discussing this stone sarcophagus, and doesn't really get through. But very excitingly, there's a cave-in at the monastery of the time that they're excavating, and they all rush straight there because everyone knows you have to do archaeology in a hurry, and especially you have to send your site leaders into dangerously unstable underground structures. And there they find a secret room under the monastery that's got paintings and documents and carvings. And there's more cave-ins. So Jared Butler and Kate, the love interest, go down to sort of check it out. And while they're down there, there's kind of more rumblings. But they find some totally intact documents, which they've put in a Ziploc bag. That was a nice touch. Most archaeologists I know always have Ziploc bags in a variety of sizes in their pockets because they're really useful on site. So that was good. But they also find a bifocal lens, which is pretty weird because bifocals aren't invented until Benjamin Franklin, famously an American invention by good old Ben Franklin when he wasn't sailing kites in thunderstorms or being ambassador to France. And so they kind of examine this, and clearly there's a mystery here. What's going on? What's bifocals doing in a monastic crypt from the 14th century? They unroll the documents, which are perfectly preserved despite being 700 years old, and they find that the documents are signed by Professor Johnston, i.e. the Billy Connolly character. So immediately you've got some kind of weird time shenanigans going on, a kind of altered timeline, if you will. And so that's kind of the main thing that's going on. It kind of cuts back to the creepy science guys from the beginning, the ones that were kind of picking up the dead, obviously a time traveler from the beginning of the film. And it turns out these guys who work for ITC, I think, is the name of the company, though it doesn't ever tell you what ITC stands for. International Time Travel Company, perhaps. I don't know.
I was going to say.
And ITC have invented essentially a teleporter. That's what they were working on. But their teleporter actually is pretty sucky as a teleporter, but is not bad as a time machine, except it only sends people back to one point in time, which is 14th century France, exactly where the archaeology dig has been. And the reason the dig has been so successful is that ITC have been feeding information about the site to Billy Connolly, so he knows exactly where to look for stuff because time travelers told him where it was. But when they found the letter from the past from Billy Connolly and the bifocal lens, which is also from Billy Connolly's glasses, the archaeologists realize that something's wrong. The guys that are financing the dig, ITC, call Jared Butler, Paul Walker, and Kate, and Francois, who's another one of the team members, and another nerd whose name I can't remember, who's like their IT guy. And they go to the ITC headquarters where they have their time machine, and they explain everything to them. And they say that unfortunately we've sent Billy Connolly back in time and we can't get him. We need some help. Okay, great. None of them speak French apart from Francois, so he's automatically in the team. The IT guy is a bit of a wuss. He doesn't want to travel back in time because, like any kind of teleporting, whether you're talking about Star Trek or whatever, if you're going to get teleported, you have to be broken down to your constituent atoms, which is essentially instantaneous death and then reassembly. He doesn't fancy that, which is fair enough. So he's staying behind. But Jared Butler's keen. Paul Walker's keen to go back and get his dad. And Rose, I think, just not. Is it Rose? No, Kate. Kate is very keen to see the past for herself. And they've also, for reasons which we don't need to get into, they're going to send back some Marines as well, some hard as nails American guys that high-fiving as their second language. They're going to go back with them. And they get time traveled into a river in France. Great. And immediately things are going to go wrong. I mean, obviously that's the kind of film this is. And so one Marine dead straight away. He gets shot by English knights. Another Marine gets arrowed. But they've all been given these special, essentially recall buttons, little kind of trackers around their neck, which they can press if they want to go home. And, they've been intensively warned that they shouldn't take any modern weapons back to 14th century France, which is duh. I mean, anyone that's read, what is it called? That's the short story about the guy who goes back in time and accidentally squashes a butterfly and then changes the entire future. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. You shouldn't be bringing back modern weapons to medieval times. But he's brought a grenade because he's a Marine. And while he's being shot with arrows and pressing his tracker to go home, he, of course, takes the pin out of a grenade. And so he arrives back in 21st century times just as his grenade's about to explode in the time travel machine. So that fucks everyone's day up and blows it all to smithereens. So now they're going to be stuck, trapped in the past. So that's not great. Things are still kicking off. Like, there's only one Marine left alive, the kind of guy that's in charge. He's just really bossy, and that's how he's in charge. He's also the guy from Desperate Housewives. That's where I recognized him from.
Oh.
He's got a very kind of familiar face. So things are still kicking off. So the English are still chasing the archaeologist. Gerald Butler is getting chased by a knight. He hides underneath some tree roots, and he finds this French woman that's also being chased, who's hidden there. And she's played by Anna Friel, who, I don't know about you guys on the other side of the pond, but over here she's pretty famous as an actress. She was in the soap Brookside, which was quite popular back in the 90s, probably before you guys were born, but when I was alive. And she's in a part of TV history in that she was the first, I think she was one half of the first primetime lesbian kiss on British TV, which obviously was a big deal back in the kind of 90s. She's been in tons of things. She's in Pushing Daisies, which was a series I really liked, and lots of other films and things. You'd recognize her if you saw her. And she's kind of, in the 90s, when I was a teenager, she was very famous, especially amongst teenage boys, I guess. But also, she was kind
gorgeous.
She was recognized as a very attractive young woman who would be often in, FHM and Unloaded and the kind of lad magazines, kind of that kind of fame. But, from her kind of acting choices, she's done some really good work. She's a very interesting character. I think she's married to David Thewlis, who is the main bad guy in this. I think this is where they met. He's also, is he Lupin in Harry Potter? I think. I know.
Yes.
When I see David Thewlis, I think of him as the Shame Wizard from Big Mouth, which is on Netflix.
Yes.
He's really great as that.
Yeah, and he's in Harry Potter.
Yeah. But so they kind of met on the set, which is nice. But she is a kind of French. We think she's a peasant woman running away from the English, who are generally being total bastards, as we all know that they like to be, and they're trying to kill her. She gets captured by them. Blah blah blah. The archaeologists get back to the castle where the English are holding out, and look who's in charge of the castle. It's Michael Sheen, who is also another amazing actor who's been kind of seduced into appearing in this absolute shitfest. He's the big bad English guy, and so all the archaeologists there, Gerard Butler, Kate, Paul Walker, and Francois, the kind of token Frenchman, and of course they're trying to explain that they're looking for Billy Connolly, but because the English and the French are at war, Francois is not welcome at the castle, and they very blasé essentially give him a sword in the guts and kill him right in front of them, which isn't very nice. So it kind of shows that Michael Sheen is not a nice guy in this film. We get a little bit of exposition. So it turns out that Billy Connolly, when he realized he was stuck in the past, made his way to the monastery where he kind of told them he was a magister, like essentially a scientist of the time, and that's what's kept him alive. Michael Sheen has got him kind of under house guard, making him Greek fire, which is a real thing from the past, apparently made by I think Archimedes, during the siege of Syracuse, or something.
I think so.
That essentially ancient napalm is what they're wanting Billy Connolly to make for them. So that's where he's been. The archaeologists get put in jail, which is a very easily broken out of. I mean, it's barely an inconvenience to them. They're just in a kind of loft of a thatched house. You know, they just have to push aside some really impermeable straw to get out of it. And so now they have everything set up. So they have to escape from jail, rescue Billy Connolly, get back to the future. So they break out straight away. They kill a guard. You know, if you're used to watching kind of time travel films like, you know, Back to the Future or anything, there's at least some kind of discussion of time paradoxes. The idea that if you go back in time, if you alter things even slightly, then that's going to affect the future you've come from. You know, the kind of grandfather paradox. If you make a time machine, go back in time, kill your own grandfather, then your own parents aren't born, and so you're not born, so you can't, in that time machine, so you can't go back in time to kill your grandfather, so he's still alive. But if he's still alive, then you're around to make a time machine, and you can go back in time and kill him, and then you're not around. And it's just this kind of time travel paradox, which is usually kind of one of the interesting things about time travel movies, but it's just totally ignored here. So these guys are like killing people left, right, and center, and with no repercussions or thought, essentially. People are getting arrowed, crossbowed, sword stuck, all sorts of things. Anyway, while they're kind of escaping, Gerard Butler discovers that Anna Friel's character is also in jail. And so he decides that he will rescue her, because he's got a bit of a thing for her, I think. And so everyone's escaped, but they all get sort of split up. And so Gerard Butler is putting his smoothest moves on Anna Friel in a little boat while they're escaping from the English. She is sort of speaking very good French, which is also weird because, you know, French wasn't really spoken universally in France at that time period, but whatever. They discover a whole bunch of things in pretty quick succession. They discover that their trackers aren't working. The things that are kind of going to send them back home don't work because the time machine has been grenaded by the dead Marine, and they only have like 6 hours left before they're going to be permanently stuck there, and the guys at the time machine company are trying to fix it in 6 hours. They discover that Anna Friel is not just any peasant woman, she's actually Lady Claire, the kind of head of the French attacking forces, and the one who historically gets killed at the siege, and her body hung over the battlements to spur the French on to retake the castle. So some major messing up of the timeline here by them rescuing her. She's not going to be at the castle. She's not going to be at the castle to be killed to encourage the French to take it. So that's going to change history. So things are kind of ramping up. But then, yeah, there's more stuff goes on. Gerard Butler has a great line where he says, "I'm not English, I'm Scottish," which is what any Scot would say when they're accused of being English. You got Anna Friel and Gerard Butler getting saucy together. You have more capturing and escaping. They find Billy Connolly. He's okay, but he's now under an immense time pressure deadline to make Greek fire, and he somehow managed to make some kind of incendiary bomb using 14th century ingredients, despite being an archaeologist. Anyway.
Despite the fact that the recipe for Greek fire is famously unknown.
Absolutely.
Nobody knows how they made it.
I mean, yeah, I think they kind of get away with the fact that, you know, he doesn't say he's made Greek fire, but he somehow made a kind of petroleum jelly that will burn even hotter when water is added to it. I mean, that's the kind of thing that possibly someone trained in chemistry could make, and they'd struggle without access to, you know, PerkinElmer or Roche or one of the biochem companies to get supplies in, but somehow Billy Connolly does it. They didn't knight him for nothing.
Greek fire was not Archimedes. It was used in 672. 672. So
Okay,
way after Archimedes.
that's good to know. I've just seen Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, so maybe that's why
Yeah.
I've got that on my mind. Anyway, so some more exposition occurs. So apparently, right back at the beginning, when the first dead guy turned up in the desert from the time travel misadventures, they did a scan on him. I don't know why. That just seems like a waste of medical resources. But he had massive kind of internal damage, which was never kind of explained until now. It turns out that every time that you pass through the time machine, you accumulate transcription errors in your DNA, and this leads to essentially breakdown of your body, which is actually quite a cool and neat little thing to have. You'd expect that, yes, if your atoms are being blasted apart and sent through time and then reconstituted somehow, then that would probably cause some damage at the molecular level. And and so that's what happened. That's why you only have a certain number of times that you can go through, and that really doesn't mean anything to these guys. They only want to go through once. But I think at just this point, do we find out that one of the bad Englishmen is not an English guy. He's actually an American Marine who was abandoned on one of their previous time travel adventures, and who thinks that he can't travel in time anymore because his body will break down. So he's fairly irrelevant to everything, but he's there. There's a goodly number of trebuchets, which is nice. So the siege of the castle is going on, and the French have brought in some trebuchets. And they are actually trebuchets rather than catapults, which is nice. And you get to see them in action, which is also pretty cool. Oh, yeah, then you have the kind of closing of the time loop. So now the big siege, which isn't, I mean, maybe I missed it, but there's no real explanation of, apart from, eternal enmity, why are the French trying to take back this English castle? It's not really explained. It's in France and they want it back, which is fair enough. But the siege is ongoing. The trebuchets are working. Everyone's in peril of some sort or another. Billy Connolly is trying to make Greek fire for the English. Anna Friel has been recaptured by the English. Jared Butler's trying to find her. Paul Walker and Kate are kind of wandering lost with the Marine guy who has just been killed by the time-traveling guy that's pretending to be English. I mean, it's super complicated and just really doesn't need to be as complicated as it is. But it's all kind of working towards a climax. And Kate and Paul Walker are trying to get the help of the monks in the monastery. And while they're there, they discover the underground crypt that Kate and Jared Butler found at the beginning, the one that has the glasses and the documents and the broken sculptures in it. And there's a bit that just really doesn't make much sense, but Kate sees that the sculptures aren't broken there and decides that means that she must have broken them for a reason. And so she goes about smashing up these nice friezes of theological themes and finds that behind one of them is a passageway, which they think is going to take them all the way from the monastery, which is in the village, which is already occupied by the French, up to the inside of the castle, which is where the English are. And so Kate and Paul Walker are traveling up through this tunnel. They get the monks to send message to the head of the French forces that they may have found a way into the castle, which could bring the siege to an end. And that's great. And so they're kind of going through the tunnel, which is a dead end. So the French are coming, they get into the tunnel. It's a dead end. That's not good. But then a trebuchet does its magic and kind of shakes the foundations of the castle, and that shakes open an entrance into the castle from the tunnel that Kate and Paul Walker and the French elite soldiers are in. So that's great. The kind of Greek fire gets blown up in the workshop of Billy Connolly, which is inside the castle. That's the French think that's a signal for them to attack, which is just as well because they've now got entry inside the castle and they're fighting to get in from the outside. You have various kind of standard sword fights. Jared Butler saves Anna Friel. You have Michael Sheen, the big bad English lord, versus Anna Friel's brother, who is the French commander of the forces. Michael Sheen gets killed for France. The ICT guy that's pretending to be English, he fights with Jared Butler, and of course, what happens? He chops off his ear. That's that loop closed. And so it's quite a fun bit where Jared Butler gets his ear chopped off, and then he's really ecstatic because then he knows his future now. He knows he's going to end up with Lady Claire live a long, happy life and get buried in the tomb that he himself excavated, which is neat. I mean, as an archaeologist, wouldn't you love to be able to excavate your own tomb? That's pretty nice. So yeah, so that's it. And then, meanwhile, back in the future, the IT guy from the archaeology dig and the ITC guys have managed to fix the time machine just in the nick of time. So presumably, time is irrelevant. They could just fix it and then go back. No, but because it only goes back to the 14th century. Anyway, never mind. We discovered that David Thewlis, the shame demon, he is really bad. He's trying to sabotage it and just to cut and run because he doesn't want to have the bad publicity of his time machine blowing up and stranding people. But he somehow ends up in the time machine without a marker. So he's there with no way of getting back, just at the time that everything's fixed and Paul Walker, Kate, and Billy Connolly press their markers to come home. David Thewlis gets put into the midst of the battle and gets immediately killed. Just before they leave, they chat to Jared Butler, but he's like, "No, I'm okay. I'm quite happy staying here with Anna Friel. That's good for me. Is it good for you guys? I'll see you never." And so he makes the fairly sensible decision to stay with his beautiful French lady while everyone goes back. And then, it kind of cuts to just a few days later. Billy Connolly, Paul Walker, and Kate are back home at the archaeological dig. They do a bit more digging around that sarcophagus, the one that's got Jared Butler and Anna Friel carved on it, and see that there's an inscription at the bottom, which would have saved a lot of time and plot if they just excavated it at the beginning. And so they see that Jared Butler and Anna Friel have a long and happy life. They have a son, and they call the son Francois, who was the instantly forgettable French translator who get killed immediately by Michael Sheen when they turned up in the past. And so that's it. I mean, it's basically a huge hot mess of a film, stuffed full of amazing actors who really don't manage to sell it as a flick. And I mean, I was 23 in 2003. This is prime kind of cinema viewing time, but I have no recollection of this film at all being advertised anywhere in the cinemas or on TV or anything. It would just, I never even heard of it. But yeah, it was a hot mess.
I remember this movie because I was a huge Michael Crichton fan as a teenager. I think I read almost every book he's ever written as a teenager, and then like nothing as an adult. So I have very fond memories of this book. So I saw the movie when it came out for sure, but I saw it once, probably in 2003, and then not since.
And was that when you stopped reading Michael Crichton books? Was it after 2003?
The book is fine. The movie did not. Like, I didn't watch the movie in 2003, but I watched it after I read the book. So I read the book maybe 10 years ago, and then I found out there was a movie about it, and I was like, I was quite excited. And then I watched the movie and was like, oh.
No, poor kid.
They could have done it better, the movie.
Yeah. It was, I mean, what surprised me is that it was really kind of amateur. It looked like a kind of TV movie, essentially. And then to see at the end that it was directed by Richard Donner was quite a surprise.
Well, and the cast, I mean, it's, yeah.
Yeah, and the cast as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of the cast, you've talked about so many big name actors that are in this, but Francois, the French guy named Francois because it's so well written. He's played by Rossif Sutherland, who is son of Donald Sutherland and brother of Kiefer Sutherland.
Oh, wow.
All right. Okay. So is he actually French?
Well, this is filmed in Quebec, so there's a lot of actual native French-speaking actors, although it's Quebecois French. I don't know my French accents well enough to have caught if the accent isn't true to present-day France. We already talked about the languages. The languages make no sense in this movie because neither modern French nor modern English would have been spoken in 14th century France. The primary language, I think, would have been Occitan, which I don't really know anything about. And then the English would have been speaking something like Middle English, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't be like well enunciated, received pronunciation, classic Hollywood baddie English, which is what they're speaking.
Yeah.
The book waves this away with in-ear translators, so
Babelfish.
it acknowledges it, but yeah.
But they say the reason why they forced Francois to go is that he's the only person that could speak French fluently. You're like, yeah,
Which
but
is
that wouldn't
nuts. I mean,
matter. He could be speaking Chinese, it wouldn't matter.
But you're archaeologists on a dig in France, specializing clearly in 14th century French archaeology, and none of them speak French. I mean, that's crazy.
Even the background actors, because like I was paying most attention for the archaeology scenes, and there's one where there's just some extras. They seem to be like using dental tools to scrape something clean, and I think it's implied that they've got like tourists or students there, and so she's teaching them how to do it, and she doesn't really say anything useful. It sort of cuts into the middle of her sentence. She's just like, just go really slowly, but it's better to be cautious. But like she's speaking English with an American accent, so it's not like there's any French people doing this archaeology except for Francois.
Token French guy. This is one of probably 3 or 4 movies that we've watched with the theme of my archaeology professor has gotten himself in trouble, and now his grad students need to go save him. And I'm like, that's such a funny theme to me, because I'm quite fond of many of my professors that I had, and was even friends with some of them. But if someone was like, your professor is in dire danger, you need to go and save them from the bottom of this cave or this different timeline or whatever, I'd been like, oh, well, I wish them well with their adventure, their journey.
Yeah, it's asking a bit much of your grad students to rescue you from being trapped in time.
It makes like archaeology grad school almost seem like cult-like, right? Because they all just love their professor so much that they put their life. They're like, we have to go save them.
Yeah, whereas quite often, you don't even know your professor's first name.
Yeah.
Let alone how they ended up going back in time or trapped in a cave.
Yeah.
Okay, so the rest of the archaeology scenes to me are pretty good. It looks like an archaeological dig, more or less. The way Kate was digging, she's digging the foundation of the monastery, so it looked superficially very similar to the way that I do work in caves, sort of in a small corner with some little cheap lamps. She's using a paint scraper, just like a flat thing, which is cool because we do use trowels, but like we use lots of other tools like paint scrapers or things like that. Her technique was awful. You want to use a paint scraper because it's nice and flat and it can help you dig your flat surface. But she's cleaning bricks and she's just sort of scraping back and forth like she's buttering bread, which is not a great excavation technique at all. Maybe she was hungry.
But I guess if your professor is always off traveling time and stuff, you may have never learned.
Speaking of being hungry, this is a terrible transition. In the first 15 minutes, they are obsessed with beer. Everyone's offering somebody a beer. I'm certain that this movie was sponsored by Heineken. Did you guys catch that?
No, I didn't. I just thought that was accurate, though.
Yeah, it's accurate. I drink a lot of beer on the field.
Yeah.
They're Scottish and they're archaeologists. I mean, that's one of the most realistic things about this film. They're gonna take a drink.
Except Paul Walker goes to see Kate while she's excavating at the site and offers her a beer, and you don't drink while you're excavating. No. At least, I mean, I dig in Serbia where they drink a lot and we drink all night, but we don't drink on site. That's an awful idea.
Yeah.
Very dangerous.
Maybe that's why her technique was so bad, because she was pished.
Did you catch the conversation about carbon dating the ink in the parchment?
Yeah. It was so, having had things carbon dated in the past, why would you carbon date the ink? Which is usually, it's just not something you would do, first of all, when it's made of bloody paper or or vellum or some kind of organic.
Entirely carbon.
Yeah, the paper is going to be well more carbon and more easily accessed than the ink. And they seem to have got it done in like 15 seconds, whereas usually it takes months to submit and then get back a carbon date.
Okay, but so they have a computer program where they did this on their field computer, And I paused it and looked at this entire computer program. Did you? Nobody else did that?
No.
I love it when I can tell you what I looked at when I paused the screen. The software they're using to carbon date this ink in the field is called C14 Ink Date Pro.
You don't want the amateur version. That would be terrible. You want the pro version.
But they were dating the ink because they didn't have C14 Paper Date Pro. They only had the Ink Date Pro.
You know, the budget only stretched to the Ink Date Pro, not Paper Date Pro. But at least they included significance values to it as well,
They did,
which is good.
Mm-hmm.
At least they didn't say this is from 1475 exactly. The date has plus or minus a couple of hundred years, which is what you'd expect.
Okay, well, let me get into these details, okay? So there's a few things that flash onto the screen. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I didn't catch every single word, but it says comparing carbon levels, and it's comparing C13 and C14, which is correct? Or are you comparing C14 with nitrogen 14?
You're comparing C14 to C12, essentially.
Yeah.
Because it's the C14 is the unstable. And that's what's breaking down to produce N15. Yeah, I can't remember exactly. I have written about it in the past, but I think essentially what you're looking at is you're comparing the amount of the unstable C14 to the stable C12. You have a reduction in C14 over time. There's a certain amount when the kind of carbon source is alive, and then over time that C14 degrades, but the C12 doesn't. And so you have a decreasing proportion of C14 to C12, and that tells you, when they're at parity, essentially that's it, radiocarbon infinite, or over 50,000 years.
So the other thing it says is the percentage is 92.9%. So it says comparing C13, C14, it seems to be suggesting there's 92.9% as much C14 as C13, which is not quite correct. What they're looking for is that there's 92.9% C14 compared to the expected value of C14,
yes.
I think is the way it would actually be done. Then there's a formula on screen. The formula is T, I guess is for time, is equal to parentheses natural log of 0.929, so that's the percentage, 92.9%, divided by negative 0.693, close parentheses, times 5,700. And so this is the real formula for carbon dating. What they're doing is they're taking the observed proportion of C14 compared to the expected, divided by, I guess this is some constant, negative 0.693, multiplied by 5,700, which is roughly the half-life of carbon, right?
Libby half-life.
Not exactly, because I'm pretty sure 5730 is the exact half-life. I'm not sure if that was changed since 2003, but I don't think so.
It used to be the entry code for the Dawson building.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to remember.
I think it's 5730 or 5740, something like that.
Now
hopefully
everybody
it's not
can
still
get
the
into
code.
the building.
I'm sure they've changed it.
Okay, but so here's the crazy thing. So that formula is on screen, but then there's 3 more lines below it. And what they do is they sort of reduce this equation like you're doing like order of operations in 6th grade math. So they multiply the brackets and exponents and blah, 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 line by line until they get the number of 600 plus or minus 47 years. Just, I guess, to make the screen have more math on it to make it look more interesting. But a computer doesn't need to go line by line doing its order of operations.
Yeah, that's a deep dive.
But good for them. I mean, that's the most accurate that we've seen, I think.
Yeah.
Of
They've at least looked at what the equation for radiocarbon decay is, which is, a big tick for them.
They at least learned what it means and what it is.
Clearly, it wasn't sciencey enough for them to be on screen, so they had to do some algebra on it. But it's crazy. It's like, if the equation was E equals mc squared, you wouldn't spend the next half page trying to factor that out until you get C equals 6 or something.
Well, let's talk about the way this movie doesn't even understand its own time travel shenanigans, because in some ways it's setting up a closed time loop, but in other ways it's setting up time, like changing the past. And like you said, they kill people willy-nilly. They don't care about changing the past. They set it up as if it is a closed time loop because they find the professor's glasses and a note that he wrote. And they also find Gerard Butler's corpse in a sarcophagus, unbeknownst to them at the moment, right? But the ear is missing, and they talk about how the couple is holding hands, which would be weird for the time. And I don't know if it's true that that's weird, but they're setting it up already that this is a unique individual. And it turns out it is because it's him. He's excavating his own grave. And so this is setting up that the past has already happened and it will happen and it can't be changed. But then they also set up this idea that Lady Claire was hung from the fortress, and that spurred the French to attack the fortress, right? But then Lady Claire doesn't get hung. She's about to be, but they rescue her, so they've changed the past. But how could Lady Claire have been hung, spurring the French to attack the fortress, if she was also buried in the sarcophagus with Gerard Butler that he had already found? It's the movie is super inconsistent about its time travel, and it doesn't really know what it's saying, I think.
Yeah. I mean, and like all of these kind of things, if they just put a little bit more thought into it, they could have easily explained it away. So they could have just said, the chronicles of the siege afterwards were written by Gerard Butler, and he said that he kind of put down the history that he recites at the beginning of the film as propaganda, or just to kind of close that paradox. So it'd be dead easy to just with a bit of thought to kind of explain those discrepancies away, but they couldn't be bothered.
As far as I remember from the book, and I would have been 15 when I read it, but I thought the book did a great job of that. I mean, again, I might have been stupid because I was 15, but I didn't come away from the book feeling like all this stuff was open-ended and I didn't get any resolution and it didn't make sense. It seemed like a really smart book to me at the time. But the movie has a lot of other open-ended stuff that it doesn't answer. Like, first of all, it's a time machine movie. Why is there any time crunch? Why can't they just go back as often as they want, or just, do whatever they want? I think the implication is that it's not really a time machine, it's a wormhole, and that wormhole must be temporally linked with the present. So as the present moves forward, the wormhole other end moves forward in time proportionally.
Yeah.
But they never state that explicitly. So I guess if we assume that's the case, it helps it make a little more sense. But there's also tons of other things they don't explain, like the wormhole is tied to this specific place in the forest in France in 1357 or whatever. But sometimes it's not, because we start off with a scene where a guy ends up in the desert in New Mexico, and they're like, how did he get there? But they never answer that question.
Also, at the end, he ends up by the castle, right? The guy.
Yeah, he ends up conveniently right in line with the English knight who's going to cut off his head. Yeah. And when the main character team travels back, instead of ending up in the forest, they end up slightly to the left in the river for some reason, just for dramatic tension, but it doesn't explain why they end up there. So it's really inconsistent about how that wormhole actually works. If it's a wormhole that is linked to a specific place in France from their fax machine, it should always be linked to the same place. So why does it ever change?
That's really annoying. Because if you're going to invest in a film which has a sciencey plot, you have to also, as the filmmakers, invest some time into making sure that it doesn't have illogical and inconsistencies in it, because otherwise that ruins it.
You could even just change that simply by saying, instead of just having them say, well, it opens up in this one spot, they could just say it opens up in random areas within this circumference, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then you would never think about it again.
Yeah.
Another thing is the whole setup for this entire situation is that they were trying to create a teleportation device, but for some reason it only teleports them directly to this particular time in France. And they have been funding these excavations and feeding them information. And the reason they've been doing it is because they're trying to figure out why it links them only to this particular period in France. And we never come close to answering that. The movie ends, they get back to France and they keep excavating, but like, why?
They also didn't
Why?
do anything, as far as we could tell, to answer that. Like, they just kept randomly sending people back. With like, what was the agenda of that, right? What was the agenda of sending the professor back?
Why would archaeologists be able to figure it out anyway?
Yeah.
They can go back to the actual place. Why don't they look around there and figure it out? It's like, ask people 700 years later to look at the garbage left behind from what they were doing themselves and try and figure out why a wormhole opens up there. They're not physicists.
Yeah. It's the whole kind of temporal bit's really weirdly explained as well. Like you're used to having a kind of Star Trek style info dump where they kind of hand wave about kind of reversing the polarity of the neutron bombs kind of stuff. But here they try to liken the time machine to a fax machine, which I thought was just really weirdly early 2000s. We're like, oh yeah, fax machines, those are cool. What if we could do those with 3 dimensions instead of 2 dimensions? That would be so awesome and gnarly. Yeah, it was just so weird.
It's not a fax machine. For our younger listeners, a fax machine, you stick a piece of paper in. It's a photocopier that sends the copy to a different photocopier. It doesn't take the paper, chop it up into atoms, and send it through a wire and reconstitute it in another fax machine. It just takes a copy of it and sends the copy.
Yeah.
So it's not a fax machine. It's a teleportation device, but they call it a fax machine. Okay, one more archaeology thing. When there's the cave-in and they discover this monastery room, there is an air horn and an announcement over a loudspeaker, which is not something I've ever had at an archaeological site, but maybe if it's a big enough site, you might have that. But they have to get in really fast because there's going to be oxygen contamination. And what do they say? They say, how long has it been open to the air? And they say 15 minutes. We've got 5 minutes until oxygen contamination.
I missed that bit.
And this is like probably drawing inspiration from real things, because I know this was a problem with the terracotta army when they discovered it of what was the name? Qin Shi Huan? Something like that. They discovered this terracotta army that had been in this enclosed tomb for over 2,000 years. And I'm sure everybody's seen pictures of these, but when they opened it up, they were really brightly painted. But because of opening it up and exposing it to oxygen and changes in humidity, like within minutes, this paint deteriorated and started to flake off. So that's a true thing that happened in that one very specific case.
Archaeology horror movie.
I don't know what they were expecting to find in this room. Like, they don't seem to have known the room was there yet. And they somehow know that there's something in there that is really delicate. So they have to go in immediately to get it out, which happens to be a piece of paper that was signed by their professor, but they didn't know that was there.
No.
And one eyeglass lens, which would have been fine because it was glass or plastic, right? And then they don't do anything else in that room. So what was it that they were worried was going to be contaminated? Like this paper, they're flapping it around. They have it in the, they radiocarbon date it immediately. So it doesn't seem to be that much in trouble. So what is it that they were worried about for oxygen contamination?
I don't know, but also you'll notice that when they're in that room, they're breathing.
I was just going to say that there didn't seem to be any...
And not dying.
No, like they're assuming a large level of sealment too within a old brick thing. Like the terracotta army was underground, buried in a tomb, right?
It was a sealed tomb.
A sealed tomb. It wasn't just rock walls. So
you were praising their having plastic baggies on them for that, but what they did when they went into that room is they jump in, look around, pick up things with their bare hands and put them in the bag without recording provenience or doing anything.
Well, and you would not get the oil on that. You would not touch that paper with your bare hands.
Yeah, the kind of work we do, we never find paper.
No.
I assume you guys never find
found
paper. But yeah, whatever we find, you record it in as many ways possible. Like you draw a map, you take a photo, you make sure you have a scale bar and a north arrow so you can reconstruct you can reconstruct the entire circumstances of finding it.
Yeah.
They just open the box, pick it up off the floor, move it around, stick it in the bag. They don't record anything. I would imagine, I've never excavated a building, but I would imagine that today you would not touch anything. You would record every single thing that's in there the way it is. You take photos. You probably even do like photogrammetry or laser scanning to get a record of everything exactly as it is the way you found it. But they just pick up 2 things, put them in a bag, and then leave, and without recording anything. Like if they're really worried about things deteriorating in there, they're losing all that information.
Well, they went to the Indiana Jones School of Archaeology.
Yeah.
I guess we could also talk about these transcription errors that this fax machine does to the body.
Yeah.
They're implying that it's DNA transcription errors, which would be a very specific thing that it is definitely not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So transcription errors are when you have essentially mutations that occur somewhere between your DNA code and the proteins that it's evolved to make for you. So yeah, transcription errors are a real thing that can be caused by things like UV radiation or any kind of ionizing radiation. But in that, what you would get is essentially kind of radiation sickness. You would just have kind of general kind of breakdown of your body and turning into kind of gloop. What you wouldn't have is lots of kind of high stress capillary fractures and bone fractures and stuff, which looks like trauma rather than anything at a molecular level.
Yeah.
The X-ray or MRI or whatever they're looking at, it looks like they describe it as the body has been cut up and glued back together and everything is just slightly out of alignment, which is totally separate from a DNA transcription error.
Yeah.
And it would totally fuck you up too. Like the way that they showed that radiograph and they're like, see the thoracic vertebrae just off kilter by this much. You would not be able to stand, you'd not be able to walk. The pain would be excruciating. You'd be paralyzed. Like it would not be a oopsie daisy.
I mean, it's a bad film, but it doesn't even really stray into so bad that it's enjoyable. It was a bit of a slog. I think I've got to give particular ire to Paul Walker. I thought he was terrible. It was the worst thing in this film, which is surrounded by lots of really good actors.
Didn't he die?
He did.
So you can't
not
say
because
that.
Not because of being in this film, but that kind of helped. But yeah, and I think I sent you guys the Monkey Dust cartoon about the Crusades. He was just very kind of out of place in that they're trying to set this kind of medieval French archaeology kind of respected knowledge kind of thing, and then he's this kind of yeehaw, I don't care for no book learning. I'm a red-blooded American. I don't need to know information kind of guy. He just does stuff.
I don't need to know information. That is
Absolutely. I only need to know 3 letters, U, S, and A. That kind of character. Who was just really, I mean, we're supposed to be on his side, but he just came across as just a total dick. Hassling Kate while she was trying to do archaeology, which has clearly got no interest in him. Hanging out with his archaeology dad despite not having any interest in archaeology and just being a general dick to him as well.
I know, go live your own life.
Not having any particular skills. He just doesn't, it's never explained what he does with his time. He's just there to be, I don't know, a pretty face, I guess.
I do like it though how the dad says to him, he says like, she's always going to love archaeology more than you. Like you don't have a chance, right?
Yeah.
And it's so true.
That's for real.
Yeah, it is for real.
There's also this idea in this movie that we've seen in quite a few others about having the chance as an archaeologist or paleontologist to go back and actually see the time period that you're studying. We saw this in Trog, where like they wanted to get into Trog's brain to view his memories so they could learn about dinosaurs, basically, right? And I can't remember. It's come up in others, but I can't think of any others off the top of my head.
Well, Indiana Jones, the most recent one, which I saw on Sunday, has that as well. Spoiler alert, sorry.
We'll have to do that one. Maybe I'll have to go to the movie theater for the first time in like 5 years.
I think I would want to go to some places, but I don't think I think if you went to medieval Europe, the smell would knock you on your ass, right? I think it would be horrible.
Perhaps. Depends who you hang out with. The Vikings, they're bathed at least weekly, so that would be okay.
But they didn't have good plumbing though, right? Like if you go to, any city, like London, right? Ugh, it would just be horrible.
Yeah. You probably would get used to it though. I mean, that's one of the things about smell is the brain's plasticity is very easy to kind of overlook a kind of constant background smell.
I guess that's what I always, when we watch these movies where someone falls in love, like they go back and they fall in love, and you're like, that person would stink so bad.
Yeah, true. But it's like, when you go away on holiday and you come back to your house and your house smells weird because you're not used to other people's houses have weird smells, but you're not used to your own house having a weird smell.
But that little bit of a weird smell is different than a human being who bathes once a year and then just wears the same clothes every day and doesn't have proper plumbing and lives among wildlife or farm animals and
Yeah, that is true. But I think, like hair, after a while, if you stop washing your body, it just cleans itself, like the natural oils. It just cleans itself. Or that's what people have told me that don't wash their hair.
I don't think it's true. I think you just get used to it.
Yeah, this was a stinker. I felt embarrassed for Michael Sheen because he's such a good actor that he was just totally wasted of this.
And Billy Connolly is hilarious.
Yeah.
Did he make a single joke?
Nope.
Right? Like, why would you hire an amazing comedian and not write a single joke for him?
Yeah, I think this was his I'm a serious actor stage when he had just done like Mrs. Brown and a few other kind of straight roles essentially. And he's a good actor, Billy Connolly. But it's hard to see him and then not just think, oh, it's Billy Connolly, because it is just Billy Connolly.
Yeah.
So our final review of Timeline is it's a stinker. Is that where we're settling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It stinks like a medieval latrine.
But the archaeology is not that bad.
No, archaeology was good. Science was not bad. I mean, okay, the carbon dating was not that bad. The wormhole science was bad, but
yeah, certainly in terms of their kind of technobabble, it wasn't as terrible as Trog, for instance.
It's synthesizing DNA.
Which one was that? Synthesizing DNA.
I don't even remember.
Was that,
it was one of the Frozen.
Iceman?
Yeah, maybe Frozen Neanderthal ones. I don't know why I remember that. I don't even remember half the movies we watch, but I remember that line. And stupidity is the cornerstone of your existence.
Yeah. You remember that just to pull it out when somebody really pisses you off.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Wayne. It was a shitty movie, but it was an okay movie for this, though. Right? Like
it was shitty, but not the shittiest.
Yeah. And like I don't want to watch it on my own again.
No,
but
I wouldn't want to watch it with people again.
No, but I mean it was a good one to cover for this, I think.
Yeah.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestonage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.